And thank you for staying with us here on PM Express. We are talking again about the erratic power supply. There has been a series of meetings in Parliament, so we need to ask what next. It was first the PURC that got involved in this, issuing several directives to the ECG. But as we've come to know, this is not an ECG problem. This is the entire value chain from generation to transmission. But of course, there was a time when the ECG told us that their transformers were down. They finished fixing them. So why are we still having the erratic power supply? Let's talk about that. Because if you look at it, it is really a situation with money. I know many have said it's a gas problem, but it's a gas problem because we don't have the money to buy it. If you look at that number, 1.2 billion is how much we are projected to spend on fuel in 2024 alone. For a country that has gone to the IMF for 3 billion, to spend 1.2 billion a year for fuel is one that obviously tells you we are definitely going to have a challenge coming up with this money. But that's not all. If you look at the debt that the sector itself is currently burdened with, also gives you a sense of the challenge, right? 2.3% of GDP. We're talking about 1.6 billion. That is huge. That energy sector alone is carrying this, tells you why we are where we are. It is not sustainable. Something had to give. This government had tried for 7 years to hold the line and keep the lights on. It's just catching up. Because the economic crisis in this country historically had always come with doomsday, which we are now beginning to see transpire in this administration as well. And then there's a question about this 58% of the total installed capacity that we currently have. And then you also see the problem there. Only that amount is being utilized, 58%. Why? The GRIDCo gives us a sense of why we are only utilizing 58% of power that remains not utilized, right? But why is it not utilized? We'll tell you that pretty shortly. Now, talking about that, this 64 is another number that jumped at us when we looked at the data that we have, the documents that we have, because this gives us a sense of why you've been off. Between January and March, we learned from ECG that they received 64 requests to manage load. So in other words, there's 64 times between January and March that ECG had to turn off your power because GRIDCo asked them to. And this is aside ECG's own challenges with the transformer that we're dealing with, overload, etc. So if you add all that to that, we are significantly in the hundreds. And reason why we are seeing your power go out. But that's not all the picture that we begin to learn. And recently, we've had this back and forth between the GRIDCo and the ECG. Today, we've seen the ECG's reply to that GRIDCo accusation. GRIDCo was accusing ECG of failing to comply with load management directives. As we learned today from that document that we exclusively got here at Joy News, if you look at the total breakdown of requests that came from the GRIDCo, it amounts to 64%, 64 notices. Now, 40 of them came in peak periods. We have 5 notices that were between 2 to 3 hours. I'll tell you about these hours shortly because it's so important for ECG when you look at when the notices came and the ability to effectively manage the load if you give them the notice in time or if you give it to them late. That's another issue that is coming up to this. So there's a lot happening in the energy sector that we need to look at. And we're beginning to learn a bit more about these notices, 35 notices coming in, 83% that we've seen in these hours, but within 1 hour. If you give the notice within 1 hour, ECG says they are unable to effectively work with that, manage the load, pull the lights off in the way that doesn't have an impact negatively on customers, because they need to manage that load, right? So they've made a point in their document to the energy minister that the demands that they are getting from GRIDCo to manage the load, it is becoming daily, it's become an irritation and a disturbance to customers, and that's a quote in your document today, because it's coming late, within 1 hour. Within 1 hour, they want the ECG, according to the ECG telling us in this document, to the minister to manage the load. It's just not realistic, they say. But there's more, because when you look at the data that we also have according to the, the installed capacity, but also the available capacity. I want to focus on available capacity of 3,250. Now, 3,250 is what we currently have available. ECG, remember, ECG's market is below that number, because the northern sector is not something that the ECG takes care of. You have NETCO that does the northern sector. So the question we need to ask is, if it's 3,250 for the available capacity, how come, and we know that the ECG's market in terms of what they supply this market is below this, how come we're still having a challenge in the ECG market? That's a question that we'll ask tonight. I mean, also the peak demand, we've talked about that here before, the deficit of 2,375 according to the GRIDCo themselves, another issue that is being talked about among the circles there. And then we would also look today, when we sit down for a conversation with our panelists, the subject around what now should happen. Because Parliament had looked into this, and Parliament, having met everybody, had again directed the ECG to issue a load management timetable. Now, with a challenge with that, and ECG hasn't released it yet, ECG tells us, in the other document that we've seen, they will need GRIDCo, VRA, to give them how much load they should manage or they should put off, based on which you can generate the load management timetable. But they don't have that. It's become very erratic. And if you look at that document that we'll talk about pretty shortly, they say it's become daily, it's irritating, it has also become a disturbance to customers. They can't plan with that. So if they don't have something they can plan with from GRIDCo and from VRA, how do they then develop a load management timetable? That's where the problem is. And we'll interrogate that when we sit down for a conversation. My guests are joining me. You want to stay with us. Everybody wants to know what's happening, why you are possibly off tonight, and you're watching us on your phone using your own data and not on your television. My guests will help us understand that here on PM Express. And PM Express is always brought to you by Syntex Sons. It is strong, it is tough. Aloma Bitters, experience greatness in every moment. Ghana AIDS Commission, PEP students, every smile matters. And Syntex Sons is the first to introduce a double layer tank. And now you can have as many layers as you want. Syntex Sons is first to introduce the white inner layer tanks in Ghana. Now we introduce you to the customer specs order. We make it bespoke in the size, in the color, and they also have 7 years warranty and gives you that value for money. You want to pick your phone and call them because they are nationwide, 0244 335 168, or shop online at syntexjuice.com. You're stronger, you're tough. Now, also is Pepsodent, because it's one that I use every evening and morning as well. They have profluoride and microcalcium ingredients in there, sealing tiny and invisible holes in your teeth. This prevents cavities from forming. It keeps your teeth strong and mouth healthy. Pepsodent cavity comes in 175G all the way down to 12G sachets, and that makes it possible for you to buy and afford one. It is designed for your pocket, and you really want to grab one also, because Pepsodent, every smile matters. My guest joining me for a conversation tonight is Dr. Kwabena Donkor. He's a member on that energy committee that met the various players in the energy sector in Parliament. And then we also have joining us in the studio with me today, Nana Mwesi. He is Executive Director of the Institute for Energy Security. Joins me in the studio. Grateful to have you. And we're also joined by Kwame Jantua. You know him. He is an energy analyst, member of the COSECA, and they've been doing a lot of work in this area as well. And he's been following very keenly what has been happening in this sector too. And I'm delighted that they joined me for a conversation on this matter. And I want to start with Dr. Kwabena Donkor, because he was part of the committee that did this work. And as we look at what happens next, we heard from the committee, Dr. Kwabena Donkor, that one of the conclusions was that you were expecting ECG to give us the load management timetable. We haven't seen that yet. I wonder if you've had any updates on that from the committee since you concluded.
Well, we concluded our meetings only this afternoon, and therefore it is too early to have that.
Okay.
But let me be clear. The players, including the ministry, all accepted that there was the need for some notification so that consumers can at least plan their life. The form and format were left to the agencies to come up with. So it may not be a timetable in the traditional format we had known in the past. But what we insisted on was adequate notification to customers. I just want to put that in perspective.
Okay. Adequate notification to customers. Let me hear your thoughts on that.
How do you define adequate notification to customers? What is adequate? At what point?
For planning purposes.
Yes, adequate. What do you mean by adequate? Is it long term? Is it short term? What is adequate? Your adequate is relative to my adequate. So what is exactly meant by adequate?
Yeah, I mean, and Dr. Kwabena-Donkor, why was that phrase used? Is it because there was an agreement that the way it's happening now is impossible to have a long-term load management timetable the way we become accustomed to?
Well, the operators, the distribution companies claim that at least in the foreseeable future, there is no one constant quantum of load shedding. And they claimed that, for example, yesterday, off-peak, there was no load shedding. Of course, I disagree that there was no load shedding. What they did was to curtail our export. In fact, a particular country got zero. And that has a serious economic, financial, and security implications. I hope there will be the opportunity to look at that. And so they claim, especially ECG, that the amounts they are asked to shed are erratic.
Yeah.
And so it becomes difficult for them to come up with, let's say, a perspective load shedding timetable. And our position is that whatever it may, no matter what they claim it is, consumers, customers have a right to know. If you are leaving your house in the morning for work, you have a right to know whether the light you have paid for, and increasingly we pay for the light before we consume the service because of payment that we do. You have a right to know whether you have light or not.
Well, unfortunately, we're having a challenge with the connection there to Dr. Kwabena-Donkor, but he's making a fundamental point that we've seen ECG capture in their letter to the Energy Minister in response to the GRIDCo complaint that it had been filed against them that we saw last week. GRIDCo had accused them of failing to comply with directives when they are issued for load management, and that was threatening the entire system and it was threatening system collapse. Now, ECG in their letter are very clear that as it stands now, GRIDCo is making erratic demands of them. That is making it very difficult to plan. And as I illustrated, the demands are coming sometimes 30 minutes to when they expect that ECG would curtail the load. And that it's just simply not possible to do that within that time frame. And that they require 2 to 3 hours notice. Now, even if they get 2 to 3 hour notice, Kwame Jantua, that will still not be enough to notify you of an impending outage in your area, because 2 to 3 hours is simply not enough for you to plan. And we focus a lot about ECG, but this is not an ECG problem, is it? This is a GRIDCo VRA generation problem.
Evans, good evening to our viewers. Good evening to those listening. Evans, I find it very remarkable that operators in this sector cannot sit and talk together, cannot know what is required of each of them. Generation needs transmission. transmission needs distribution, distribution needs customer. Are you trying to tell me that they cannot work together? All this spat in public is not helping anybody, because at the end, what does the customer require? They require power. Sort it out between yourselves. I don't see how it needs the Select Committee on Parliament to get stakeholders together. I don't see where that
The minister himself is mediating between the ECG and GRIDCo.
Why should the minister mediate?
And now we have Parliament.
Are you not part and parcel? Don't you hold each other's hand? If you generate and GRIDCo doesn't transmit, doesn't it affect generation? If GRIDCo doesn't transmit, doesn't it affect distribution? So why can't you sit and talk together? Why all this spat in public? Why this has done this, hasn't done this, has done this, hasn't done this? And ECG are not prepared to talk about any load shedding. So then I ask the question, and it can be a spiritless question, who is pulling the strings? Who is pulling the strings to stop our stakeholders from telling us the truth? Transparency.
But we know the truth now, don't we? I mean, the truth is obvious now, that this is a generation problem.
It is known. It's not only generation. It's got to do with finance, it's got to do with debt, it's got to do with equipment, it's got to do with maintenance, it's got to do with purchase of fuel.
True.
All these are part and parcel of it. And you're trying to tell me that these three do not know that?
They do.
And the politicians do not know that? It seems that we, the consumers, don't know it. Why? Because we are not being told the truth. Look, if we were told way before when this thing started, what we were being told today, would we not have probably solved this matter? So right now, we know there's a financial issue there. Where is the money going to come from? Who do we point a finger at? Is it the finance ministry? Is it the presidency?
And you make a very important point about knowing that this is a finance problem. And I'll come back to Nana Moisi shortly, but I need to ask that question of Dr. Kwabena Donkor. I mean, I look at the debt that have been accumulated in the sector. And look at what has been projected that we'll spend this year, 1.2 billion to buy fuel. Knowing that this is a finance problem, fundamentally, is the committee looking to also hear from the finance ministry at least? Sorry, Dr. Kwabena Donkor, you've muted. If you can unmute for me.
Before it comes...
I was saying that I can't speak for the committee since I'm not in the leadership of the committee.
Yeah.
However, it is a truism that 70% of the challenge is financial liquidity, but there is also the technical challenge. For me, the worst part of the challenge we have is the desktop island that we are doing. The ministry
Okay. Apologies with that connection. We'll try and fix that. But yeah,
just to finish, you rightly talked about how much is required to buy fuel, 1.2 billion.
Yeah.
That's about 3.3 million every day, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if you were to transpose it into the month, that's about 98 million.
Yeah.
That is required. Where is the money coming from? And that is the question that needs to be answered today. After this parliamentary thing, we know how much is required. Either the Minister of Finance or the presidency should tell us. Why do I say the presidency? Because PRC is under the presidency, isn't it? PRC is supposed to advise the president with regards to happenings in the sector, aren't they? And if the presidency knows about it, they tell us, we are finding money. Where is the money coming from? What amounts of money are you looking at? Why don't they want to inform the people? Because if you inform us, every step of the way, we too can plan. So today, Ministry of Finance has gone out. They've been able to get 5 billion, 5 million. This is how we're going to pay. This is how much it will last. People can plan.
Yeah, I mean, talking about planning, and then Amoisi, for the customer, we've been asking for a load management timetable for a while. Dr. Kwabena Donkor just talks about their phrasing of that challenge to ECG was to say, share a notice as soon as you can. What's the problem there? Knowing what you know with what's happening in any sector, is it realistic to expect a timetable?
Good evening, Evans, and to your viewers. Yes. So, Doctor was clear in his mind that we needed a form of notification. It could be through a timetable. The other one, I don't know what to call it. We have come to probably acknowledge that a timetable, a load-shedding timetable, is enough of a notification to customers as to when to expect power and when not to expect power. The timetable we've seen over the period gives us enough time to plan our life. Normally, we see a timetable probably weekly, sometime in 2 weeks, so you can project your planning. For a businessman, you can plan when to deploy materials or staff and all that, and that takes time to do. So 1 week or more has been good and enough for us.
Yeah.
We don't know how they are going to carve the next one, since Dr. Donko was not explicit as to saying that the notification will be really in the form of a timetable. Is it that this time around it's going to tell us that for this area, don't expect power, or I'll come back to you in an hour when I am notified by GRIDCo? It beats our imagination.
Yeah, I mean, and you make that point. I just want to quote a few facts as contained in this response to the minister. He says, it is worth to note that between January and March, 64 requests were received from GRIDCo for load management. Out of this, 40 were for peak periods, 24 off-peak periods. But the most important point that is stressed there is that these requests come too late, right? So they make the point that the compliance rate of 100% for January and February and 33% for March does not support the assertion being made by GRIDCo that ECG does not comply with load management requests from the center. It is also on record that requests from GRIDCo for ECG to drop load are mostly received within 30 minutes to an hour prior to GRIDCo disconnecting ECG's feeders at BSPs. If that is what is happening, and they make a final point here, I guess that sums up the challenge that they tell the minister they are facing with GRIDCo's request. Now, requests from GRIDCo for load management are no longer for emergency operations, but are made on a routine day-to-day basis, becoming an irritation and disturbance to customers. When you read this from ECG, assuming that this is accurate, I mean, and ECG is putting out the information to the minister, does this present the picture that says you can plan for it?
It's as if they are working in different loops, but I think they all work in the same loop. If we sit back, not in the loop, but as watchers of the industry, we can find that from the beginning of the year, from January up to now, the generating system, have never been able to produce anything in excess of 3,300 megawatts from January till now. That's a fact. Meanwhile, system peak demand is around 3,650. So at least what happened in January must inform ECG of whatever is happening. It repeats itself in February. It repeated itself in March. And so ECG cannot tell us that it has not seen the trend in the quantum of power being generated each day. We sit out and we see. And so you know that you don't have anything in excess of 3,650 to meet your peak demand for ECG, for NetCo, and for exports. That's the system demand. At least you have this data to guide your thoughts. And you can't tell us that when ECG or when GRIDCo is asking generators or ask them what they can dispatch, because on daily basis, GRIDCo will call all the power plants. This morning, up to this time, which plant is available? Can you dispatch? Everybody sends a notification to GRIDCo. So GRIDCo knows which plant can be dispatched. ECG sees this one. They can't tell us they don't see. We sit out and we see. Again, GRIDCo will give notification to ECG as to what the load they are receiving from the generators are, or the quantum of power they are receiving. But ECG knows your load, that this is my load at this time, within this period, this is my load. It's almost the same dashboard they use. And so even if they give you a notification of 2 hours, and you tell me that they gave you a notification within 2 hours or so, and you were able to comply 100% over the period of February and January, right?
Yeah.
And in March, you could meet their requests up to 3%.
Yeah.
That's 1/3 of that, right?
Yeah.
It means that you are doing well. But at least we admit that the time is short to inform customers. But data is there to tell us today that tomorrow we'll shed load. I can tell. How can't you tell? So at least use the 3,000.
How much load you're shedding is a problem.
Let me tell you.
Because tomorrow, of course, they don't shed load. But as we speak right now, considering that they are receiving much of the notification 30 minutes before time, even GRIDCo doesn't know as we speak tomorrow. It appears so. I mean, we're reading the document.
Okay, so
it says load mostly received within 30 minutes to an hour prior to GRIDCo disconnections of ECG speed. It almost appears to say the day before they don't know until something happens and they pull out. Do you accept that as an explanation?
We see the pattern. Okay, first we know the problem.
Yeah.
It's fuel supply challenge. Also, for lack of cash flow, some plants are forced to go down, not because they don't have fuel, but they couldn't do plant maintenance, so they are now doing corrective maintenance and come on stream.
And you're right. GRIDCo actually wrote a long brief on the situation, which most of you have seen, where they break down the problem into 3, as in what you said: fuel, faults, and maintenance, which is what you're going to quote.
I'm going to come to that.
So you're saying that they know already.
You know already, and you know in January, you know all the plants that are down for corrective maintenance, and the plants that are down because of lack of fuel. And you can mention Amandi, Bridge Power, Senate, Siemens, and Ponsema.
Assembly Phase 1.
And Assembly Phase 1, because they are not getting enough from Nigeria.
Yeah.
Okay?
AXA unit.
And all that, you know them. And you know when fuel can come in. All this while over the last 3 months, we've not had any liquid fuel. And so if gas flow remains the same as it remained in January, going into February, you should expect the same thing to occur.
So my question...
In March, it will recur.
So my question then to you is, what do you read then into ECG getting the notification request 30 minutes before time within an hour? When they should have known this, not even a week, but days ahead because of the supply. I mean, how much are you reading into that?
That is not to say that GRIDCo should not notify them on time, because at least...
They should.
They must.
No, the point you're making is that they have enough information at GRIDCo and VRA to project the available power. And
we can tell you, from January up to today, there's always been a deficit in generation between 480 and 550 megawatts. So you can tell that by average, you have a deficit of 500 megawatts. From January to today, consistent. Sometimes they produce about 3,250, sometimes 3,200, sometimes 3,280. It's just a range. Okay? So at least the minister knows this, PRC knows this, GRIDCo knows this, ECG knows this. And so it's not something new for ECG to come and say, because I was notified just 30 minutes before time, I am unable to do what I need to do.
I mean, I see.
But that's not whole brief for GRIDCo to say that don't give them enough of notification. Because at least GRIDCo...
But you agree ECG cannot by themselves put out a load management timetable if they're not getting enough information from GRIDCo and from VRA?
It is true. It is the case. That's when quickly you have to write to GRIDCo and say, look, I was there what happened in January. It looks like it's repeating itself in February and might repeat itself in March. If these issues are not addressed, give me a load management notification. Give me a range so that I can also put out a timetable. I don't think it's too difficult to do. But then they give you notification, whether they give you notification or not, you are drawing more than what is being supplied. And so you are causing frequency to drop. And when frequency drops, it comes along with also a drop of fluctuation in voltage. At a point, the system can collapse.
Which is the warning that GRIDCo issued when they wrote to the minister. Yeah, Kwame. So there's a sort of confusion that shouldn't be there at all, because we know what the problem is for all this in short supply. One plant it's faulty right now. There are a host of others that are in maintenance. So we should have a clarity on this matter. But it appears that we don't. Even on the back of the parliamentary sitting, we still have a bit of a doubt as to really when will Timetable come and when will this be resolved.
Evans, all the stakeholders know demand outstrips supply. It's a constant. They all know that. Now, when you look at the figures with regards to the challenges, what goes through transmission? What product goes through transmission? What commodity goes through transmission? Isn't it electricity?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
What goes through distribution? Isn't it electricity? So is generation, isn't it? Yeah. Now, when you get the challenges with generation, it's got to do with units unavailable due to inadequate fuel. 1. Units unavailable due to maintenance. 2. Units thermal generation liquid fuel availability, and units unavailable due to maintenance twice and generation capacity. You know that. It's a constant. So, if for nothing at all, if there's lack in communication, shouldn't the three organs, generation, transmission, and distribution, and probably someone representing customers, form a small committee where at every given day, generation is known and is quickly communicated? Because from the letters that we are seeing, there seems to be some lack of communication somewhere. But that lack of communication shouldn't be there, because you know that demand outstrips supply. So why the forthcoming back and forth, back and forth, back and forth? Why?
Politics?
It could be. I don't know. But that's why I said somebody is pulling some strings from somewhere that we don't know. ECG is not prepared to talk about it. GRIDCo is not prepared to talk about it. Half of generation companies, they are quiet. And you ask the question, okay, all this is going on. What's the responsibility of the Minister of Finance and the presidency? If they tell us that the president is keen that we don't go through these blackouts, what is the presidency doing? Should they not speak to us? Should they not? We, the consumers, are going through the challenges of not getting the electricity. And the stakeholders are not prepared to come and tell us, because ECG are saying there's no, we don't need to do any load shedding. GRIDCo are saying you need to do load shedding. Generation companies say we don't have money for maintenance, A, B, C, D, you haven't paid us. The question of gas, do you know the question of gas? Do you know why we are not getting enough gas? Who is talking to us? I expected Ghana Gas to come and tell us something.
But Ghana Gas, if you read a GRIDCo brief, has been reliable. It's the Nigeria gas that hasn't been.
Well, there's debt, isn't there?
Yeah.
Even with Ghana Gas, there's debt, isn't there? And Ghana Gas will not come and talk about their debt, but there's heavy debt there.
True.
That is why Minister of Finance should be talking to us. Look, this thing hasn't only got to do with ECG and GRIDCo. It's also got to do with the politics of it and the lack of adequate financing. Because what? 3,680 megawatts is the demand. We are lower than that, aren't we?
Yeah.
And if they tell us we have excess capacity, why are we going through this?
But I need to ask a question too. I mean, let me put that to Kabna Donko, who is an expert in this field as a power minister once. There's also the question about the efficient use of gas. Because you can get far more power generated with the same amount of gas than if you give it to, say, a single cycle plant. If you give it a combined cycle plant, that same amount of gas will give you far more power. And from what I'm reading, it appears that we are not being efficient in the allocation of gas, considering the different types of plants that we have. Some can give you far more power with the same amount of gas. I wonder, when you met with the power sector players, did this even come up?
Let me start by stating this position. I am a student of energy policy. I'm not an expert.
Okay.
I hate the use of that word by Ghanaian media. Okay. It is not just efficiency of use. Efficiency is one of the criterion that you will need. There is grid stability. You need a certain amount of generation from the Eastern Corridor, as well as another amount of generation from Western Corridor. It is only when you have satisfied that in nominating, let's be clear about this, VRA on a daily basis nominates a certain number of plants. ECG on a daily basis nominates a certain number of plants. In the nomination process, you have to take account of efficiency of gas use, in that the combined cycle plants, all things being equal, will be more efficient than the simple cycle plant. Mm-hmm. But for January, February, in the Western Corridor, the combined cycle plants were down. Either one unit was down, or 2 units down, or the heat recovery unit was down. So on paper, you have them, but availability was another issue. If you take the Eastern Corridor, then you have Sonon Asogli and SemPower being the two most important or most efficient combined cycle plants. However, the Eastern Corridor also has Akosombo back in it. So in the Western Corridor, the Twin City plants were also down for a while. So it is not just simple efficiency that, okay, let's dispatch the plants that have the optimal use of gas in terms of combined cycle generation. There is grid stability. And then there is availability of those combined cycle plants. Then, of course, there are also contractual obligations. For example, Cal Power is a simple cycle plant. Mm-hmm. But the contractual obligations of gas power makes it important that we dispatch it. Other than that, the capacity charge we will pay may erode whatever advantage it is we have from dispatching, let's say, TAPCO when one unit is down. And therefore, the combined cycle can only give us 50% more. So there are all those economics. But I want to disagree that there's no politics in it. There is serious politicking. Mm.
And where's the politics?
Serious politicking because of our own political history. And unfortunately, some chief executives take the posture that they are political operatives rather than running commercial entities. So there is that challenge. And ECG on the average, ECG's load on the average is between 2,500 and at most 2,800.
Yeah.
But ECG is not the sole customer. Mm-hmm. There is NETCO. There are other bulk customers, such as the mine, that buy from VRA, in addition to exports. Then there's, of course, Enclave Power, the rest are bulk customers. So it is that. The real issue today, for example, yesterday, I don't want to name the country, we only off-peak, we supply zero. Because there's purportedly a directive to cut exports. And that is the most dangerous directive I've heard in a long time. The export is the backbone of the financial stability of the sector. For example, if you export to Sonabel, Burkina Faso, you get 100% of your payment in hard currency. If you supply the same quantum to the domestic market, at best you get about 58% in cash in a devalued cedi. It is not just the financial flows, but the strategic implication. The water takes its source outside Ghana. The capital of Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou, is totally dependent on power from Ghana, except their solar unit. If we decide that because we have a challenge domestically, so we are cutting supply to Burkina Faso, we are telling them to consider further damming the water in their territory. Remember the issue between Ethiopia and Egypt. Apart from that, if you take GRIDCo and VRA, a lot of their external financing is based on their export earnings. Their export earnings are escrowed first and foremost for debt servicing. And therefore, to issue a directive that we should cut export is uninformed and not in the national interest.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a position that you've upheld since this directive was announced on this same show by the chairman. And from, you say a country's getting zero as a result of that, but there are also some who say that, well, when you're in crisis, you take extraordinary measures. Doesn't that suffice in this particular time?
It's anybody who espouses that position does it out of ignorance and does not look at the interest of the nation state Ghana. First of all, our interest is to be able to service the energy sector, the facilities we have contracted to improve our grid, to improve VRA's capacity to maintain Akosovo Dam, etc. Secondly, the export earnings from our export is what is holding the system together at the engineering level.
That's a point I want to put to my colleagues, my guests in the studio with me. And I'm going to see, on that quick point, what do you make of that, this directive to reduce the power we exported? It was the IPPs who first.
Sorry, if you just give me a second. If to throw in this caveat, today the ministry officially informed us that they have not received any such directive.
I see.
GRA also said they had not received any such directive. However, the export yesterday, the export was totally curtailed to a particular country called zero. I just want to put that in context.
An important clarification, yes.
Okay, so was it an outright halt or reduction in exports quantum? If it's outright halting of exports, then it's not being complied with.
Because you're still exporting, yes.
Okay, just that we've seen a reduction in exports, quantum, right? But at least Sonabel, Burkina Faso, is receiving roughly about 65% of what it used to receive before the directive was kicked in. The country that Dr. Danko is unable to mention is La Côte d'Ivoire.
They received zero yesterday.
Yes, of course. Not just yesterday. On when is it? On the 7th, yes, they received negative. Also on the 2nd, then on the 3rd as well. That's the only country that I'm sure is really under pressure, more pressure. But at least Benin and Burkina Faso are being fed with some quantum of power. It is true. We've constructed a facility to put up some infrastructure to aid the export markets. I'll come to that, Evans, this one. Just because we have some quantum of power that we are using it as reserve, that reserve should still be put to use. And when we are in hot soup like this, we can draw part of the reserve. That's what we are doing. And so some power is being sent to this country. We built transmission lines upgraded from 161 kV to 330 thereabout. That line between Ghana through Burkina Faso, financed by the French government. Okay, if we choose not to export anymore, that infrastructure becomes stranded and must be paid for. That's what Dr. Donkor is talking about. But I think that, yes, we may lose some markets at this moment. What Burkina Faso and the rest can also do is to pre-finance our fuel purchase. They notice how much we are producing. Some plants are down. If they can put forward some money to buy fuel,
then we get enough locally. But somebody from our side must begin that conversation.
Exactly the case. We ask ourselves, Evans, today, where is the excess capacity? You see the politics we are talking about? We play politics with everything. Since 2017 up to today, what we observe from our decks, it's some reserve margin. Every engineering system or power system must have reserve margin. For PRC, it requires 18% of reserve margin. What's 18% of even 5,000 installed capacity? It's about 1,000 megawatts. What's 18% of our peak demand, which stands at 3,650 thereabouts? You're talking about something around 900 or 850 megawatts. So if you find any power that's available, not used, around 1,300, and you call all of that excess capacity, when you don't call them by their name and say, look, we have reserve margin as we are asked to do, but there is something excess beyond the reserve margin, it makes sense to consume and absorb.
Yeah, but even if you have excess capacity, but you can't fuel it.
What's the use of it?
There's no point.
So we call excess capacity, woof. The day the real woof came, we are caught.
I need your quick comment on the efficient use of the gas that we have. The single cycle versus a combined cycle. Because if you read the figures, a lot of the combined cycles are not being fueled.
Yes.
We spend a lot of the fuel on the single cycle, but we know combined cycle plants are most efficient.
Sure, phase one of
Asogli
is no. Well,
it's combined.
It's combined. The Senate is also combined.
Yeah.
They are all in the Eastern Corridor.
Yeah.
I understand the argument of Dr. Donkor that just to balance the grid, the Western Corridor must bring some supply on board. The Eastern Corridor should also bring, just to make sure the system balance. We appreciate that. However, there are some plants here within the Eastern Corridor that are single cycle that are also running. When you have a whole Asogli, 200 megawatt phase one, that when you give, let's say, and for the ordinary viewer, if I give to a single cycle plant, let's say 100 scarf, standard cubic feet of gas, and they can give me, let's say 50 megawatts. If I give the same 100 standard cubic feet of gas to a combined cycle, they can give me something in excess of 65 megawatts.
Yeah,
because
even more. I mean,
or even more. I'm trying.
Yeah.
So there's benefits, both economic and common sense, to give power or the.
So why are we doing it? Because every engineer in that sector knows this.
Yes, I'm sure some of the politics are also in there, and also it's also making engineering sense also to balance the grid. So let some other players who don't even have combined cycle yet are in one region, but can support the grid stability, let them have.
Okay.
But if we are in the Eastern Corridor and some plants single cycle are running, when Asogli sits, when Senate sits waiting for fuel, then I think we are not thinking right.
Mm.
The danger we have with the exports is if a country like Nigeria that has massive gas decides to up their game in terms of production, they will take our markets off us.
In terms of supplying to the sub-region.
Exactly, and we would lose out there. But Evans, the question is, what is the way forward now?
Find the money.
I believe, apart from finding the money, I believe we should quickly start putting a policy in place with regards to residential power. And that residential power should be with renewables. If we indicate that every house, as a policy, every house being built today should have a solar panel on it, and you work to bring the cost of solar panels down, and every house has a solar panel on it, within the next 5 years, there will be a lot of power.
That can years be back, Energy Commission started this, where you buy the panel, they subsidize it for you, and then they give you some rebates to do it. I remember there was a house opposite my house that actually invested at the time to take advantage. It just hasn't taken off.
So what happened?
It hasn't taken off the way they had anticipated.
Why hasn't it taken off? A lot of power is residential. We need to convert it so that even for industry, we can get conventional power. But if you have a situation where residential is creating a lot of power, net metering, the grid can take it. Yeah. Where we can get some power to compensate some of these things. So what is the plan forward? How are we planning? And you see, Evans, this is not a political issue, the way we do the politics here. It's a national issue where you have to have everyone around the table to plan going forward.
You know what we're going to do on the back of that? We're going to have a national dialogue in this same room with everybody else so we can explore that in much broader depth, because it's important. We've been dealing with this piecemeal. As and when the lights go on, we'll talk about it. But there's a bigger conversation we need to have. And
bigger conversation.
And we're going to bring everybody to the table for that conversation here on Joy News. Dr. Komla, so the committee had met the players. What next? What happens now?
So we move away. In terms of this patch, the Nigerian guys, we have two gas pipes. We have the indigenous guys. That is all of the domestic gas aggregated, and then the Nigerian gas. The Nigerian gas, VRA pays in excess of $30 million a month. VRA is the contracting part. So VRA takes half of the gas, the Nigerian gas, and then gives the other half to plants nominated by ECG. In VRA, for example, if you take
unfortunately, I just have 30 seconds to wrap up, unfortunately.
Okay, I just want to quickly say that because VRA is the contracting party, if they give all of the gas to Senate Assembly, because since their plants are single cycle and they don't pay, then VRA suffers a double whammy. They have to pay the Nigerians for gas they have given wholly to others and who haven't paid. If VRA uses the gas, at least they are able to pay for what they use.
Okay, but I need to give us a roadmap going forward after all the meetings you've had in the committee. What next? What's the plan?
Oh, what next? There is some assurance from ECG, largely from ECG and GRIDCo, as well as the generators, that probably within a month, the liquidity challenge, because a number of the plants that went down for maintenance are up. Because we were eating into our reserve margin in terms of available capacity, once 2-3 plants were out, we were exposed. And I like the idea of the politicking that was played in the past with excess capacity. It has come to haunt us.
Okay.
Going forward, we should see power as a non-political tool.
Yeah. And Doc, on that note, I would say thank you very much. But you haven't heard the last of this, because we want to create that platform for a bigger, more comprehensive conversation, as Kwame had suggested, and something that we will do for this Joy News National Dialogue on the energy sector. Is a debt, is a generation, is a transmission, is a distribution. It is also renewable energy. It's a very complex matter.
And maintenance.
That needs to be addressed comprehensively. We'll create a platform for that to happen. Enjoy the rest of your evening.